Hello, hello, everybody, and welcome back. Thank you for joining me. This is Believe, where we look to influence, inspire, and impact our viewing audience, both those who are checking us out live and the playback. Today, specifically, I'm excited because I have joining me my sister in Christ, my co laborer, my friend, Shauna King. Shauna, welcome to Believe.
Thank you so much. Glad to be back. Feels good.
Yes. Excited to have her today. Specifically, we're going to be talking about cope, what it means to cope, courage to overcome, persevere, and endure. That's my acronym for cope, courage to overcome, persevere, and endure. So sit back, relax, join us. We're going to talk about what cope means, what it looks like, ways we can cope. So thank you again for joining us. We'll see you on the other side of the break.
It is key that you mind your mental health.
Hey guys, how's everyone doing this week? Hi.
Use the 5 keys to mental movement.
Really monumental week for me. I realized that I was not being myself.
Reaching out.
Be positive attitude person self, like you guys know me to be.
Staying upbeat.
And give back to that happy, cheery self you guys of me.
This week's been kind of
Being
stressful,
creative.
all of the workload that we have on online learning. So I've been trying to use different platforms and different websites to help ease my mind and ease my stress.
And what about you, Marjorie?
Well, you guys know me. I just love to work with others and serve them.
Serving others.
Realize that when I serve others, my mind is off of myself.
That's right. And don't forget, self-care is key.
Self-care.
All right. So see you guys next week.
Right.
Bye.
Your mind matters.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And again, thank you for joining me 6 p.m. here, fourth Sunday. Every second and fourth Sunday, you can check me out on the Vision and Purpose Media Productions Facebook page. This is Believe, where we look to inspire, influence, and impact. And today, I am talking with my guest. And actually, it's not going to be an interview. We're really just going to be sharing our thoughts on what it means to cope. Courage to overcome, persevere, and endure. Shauna and I are co-founders of the nonprofit organization, The Better Place Incorporated, and we got some great things that are coming down the road we're excited about involving our nonprofit. We're also co-hosts of Village Talk. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about cope, courage to overcome, persevere, and endure. So, Shauna, my first thought I want to ask you on this subject. When you hear courage to overcome, what does that mean to you?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me back. I mean, it's been a minute.
It's been a minute.
It has been a minute.
At least two.
At least 2 minutes since I've been here, so it feels good to be back. And you're right, we've got so many things going on with the nonprofit that we're going to be sharing later, but it's good to be here.
Yes.
And when we think about courage to overcome, I think when we think about our nonprofit, right, and we think about the Better Place, we acknowledge that there's things that we have to overcome. Mm-hmm. There are issues, there are personal concerns, there are issues in our country, there's in our community, and if we let all that get to us,
yes,
it can almost stop you in your tracks.
Yes.
If you look at the news any day of the week, right, there's so much that can be discouraging, so much that can cause you to be overwhelmed, mm-hmm, that even if you don't even look at your own personal issues, right,
yeah,
that it can cause you to struggle to say, how do I keep going? How do I move forward? And so when I think about the courage to overcome, we first have to say, where can we find within ourselves the desire to want to move forward and to look in the midst of all the things that may not look right in the world and things that may not be going well in our own lives, and say, how can we keep going and keep doing what we're called to do? So that's really what I think of when I think of COPE. I'm curious for you, though. I mean, because it's your acronym.
Yeah, COPE, the courage to overcome, persevere, and endure. That was the initial focal point and emphasis of our nonprofit,
yep,
back in 2016.
Wow, it's been that long now, hasn't it?
It's been 6 years. It's amazing. And I remember the day I was driving home and this inspiration came to me on the subject of COPE. and I called you and we talked about it. I think for me, when I think about courage to overcome, I actually think about your book. You wrote a book, Fearless.
Yes, I did.
And
During a time where we were all trying to cope.
it was during the pandemic.
It was.
It was released not too long after the
June
pandemic
of 2020.
started.
June of 2020.
And so there was the reality that we were going to have to go back to the classroom at a time when this whole process of understanding what the pandemic was about, the virus, and there were people actually losing their lives over it. And as a classroom teacher, I remember one of my initial thoughts was, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up to be an educator, not to walk into an environment where my life would be at risk. But reading your book gave me the courage to face the fear, the reality of going back into the classroom in that circumstance. And I love what you said, because feeling overwhelmed, right?
Right.
But then also fear can immobilize you. It can,
Absolutely.
It can paralyze you. It can cause you to think that things are not going to get better. So I would say that that's one of the first things that comes to my mind when you were writing that book, Fearless, and you just think about courage itself. What thoughts come to you?
Well, so it was March of 2020, as we know, where I think a lot of us got the just go home for 2 weeks, just go home for 2 weeks and then we'll figure this all out. And we got that. And then as we began to see what was transpiring, things that we had never seen before. I mean, we had not heard of something that was, we had in history books, but we had not seen where we were having people who were contracting a virus and then were passing away. It was cross color lines, ages, even though our children were protected, it seems like they were. Other than that, there were a lot of people who were being affected by it. And it was very, it was a scary time for many people. And I remember seeing the word fearless one day and just looking at it. And for some reason at that moment, I saw the word differently. I saw the word, when typically when you think of fearless, you think of someone who has a whole bunch of courage and is not scared of anything and is just moving forward because they are fearless, right? But when I saw it, I saw the words separately. I saw fear and I saw less. And what I heard was, if you want to be fearless, the first step is to fear less, to have a smaller level of fear. And that just kind of changed everything for me. And so where at one particular point it was, how can I just get rid of all of my fear and just act like I'm not scared?
Right,
And just,
right.
it shifted to, in my prayer, was God help me to have less fear today than I did yesterday.
Right.
Right. And that felt more manageable to me. Just let me have a little less fear. And the next day, have a little less fear, and to begin to trust God in a way that I could feel Him removing that fear from my life and creating a level of courage. And so that's what Fearless was birthed. And so from day 1 to day 21, you see a little bit of my story, a little bit of Bible story about examples in the Bible, and then just encouragement for us to be able to say, if you just to focus on fear for 21 days. And I appreciate your testimony about it.
Yeah.
That it did a lot for me just to write about fear for 21 days.
Yeah.
And to read that and to just pour, and to be honest with the fact that we sometimes deal with it. And that's why we need courage.
Yeah.
That's why we need courage.
Because even in listening to you now, one thing that comes to my mind also is after the death of George Floyd and the incident surrounding that, there was this, I could feel and sense myself slipping back into depression because that was a traumatic event. Even though that wasn't me, witnessing that event was traumatic to me. And I, knowing myself and being self-aware and journaling up to this point, I could sense the depression, the cloud beginning to hang over me.
Yeah.
And one of the effects of that was I didn't want to travel to certain states within the United States, certain places related to the South and the Midwest. But this summer, I took a car trip that included both the South and the Midwest. So along with the pandemic, I had another situation that I had to learn to face.
Yeah.
So I think in listening to you now and talking about your journey and writing the book and, using prayer as one of your strategies, because that's definitely something I would want to do
Definitely.
in this talk, is talk about practical strategies. And I know for me, fearing less and demonstrating courage to overcome begins with facing the fear. I even thought about that today. We have fears we don't tell anybody about, but God knows, and He does push us out of our comfort zone, stretches us. He causes us to face those fears when we're willing to admit them and acknowledge them. And that was a big step for me to go on that trip anyway, despite how I was thinking and feeling. So what's a strategy besides prayer that you see that is helpful to demonstrate courage to overcome something?
Yeah, so you're right. There are things that you can do, and I don't know if you would call them small steps or big steps, but one of the things that I like to do is look back. And I know some people say, oh, you don't look back, you're always supposed to move forward, but stay with me. What I like to do is just look back at myself and where God has brought me from 5 years ago. There's some things that I would never have thought that I would have done 5 years ago. It's like, there's no way. I'm too scared of that. And then look at now, and I'm like, wow, okay, one of them being right here with you, right?
Right.
If you had said 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when we were working together at James Madison Middle School, one day you guys will have a podcast and you'll be opening up a nonprofit, but like, yeah, no, that doesn't sound. And so looking at what God has already done and looking at how when you allow Him to use you, it'll grow and each day. And so you're saying, okay, well, what am I to fear? Because He's got me. He's got it. And I don't know what's forward because I could be a little nervous about what's moving forward too. But to be able to look back and just say, He's done it before. He'll do it again. I need not fear. And having that courage. So I would just encourage a practical step of looking back at where you were 5 years ago. What are some things that you are able to do now? Move forward in that you didn't think 5 years ago you could be, that you might have been too scared to do.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that really can help us move forward.
I love that. It reminds me of Psalm 77 because it specifically talks about, I will remember the years of the Most High. Things may not be the way I would want them to be right now, but the psalmist specifically says, I will remember the years of the Most High,
Yes.
meaning I'm going to look back and I'm going to be encouraged by what has already happened to get me where I'm trying to go. And even David, facing Goliath, said, I defeated the bear and the lion, so Goliath is nothing
You're nothing.
to me, and so I appreciate what you just shared. And I do believe that that's important, right? Yeah. Journaling has helped me in being able to do that as it relates to just kind of like taking inventory of where I am today based on where I've been.
Right.
I've also learned, as you're saying, when you get involved and invested in activities that builds confidence. And that's what I see David saying, because I defeated the bear and the lion, I'm confident that I can face this Goliath situation as well. So I think one strategy that comes to my mind when you're talking about coping is being honest with your thoughts and feelings, even when they are contrary to faith. Like, for example, Jesus said, I'm overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, but yet he still prayed.
He did.
He prayed to God, even though he was overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, but being vulnerable and transparent with the disciples that he was speaking to at the moment. This is usually how we would not see Jesus, right? We see him as the one turning over the tables and dealing with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and, putting them in their place. But here's a moment where he's being vulnerable, transparent. He's displaying his weakness in the reality of what he's getting ready to go through. And I find that, that's courage too, to be open and honest. And I do believe you have to have people in your life that you can be open and honest. Hence, that's how I got the nickname, what was it?
Did I give you the nickname?
Yeah,
Cranky Cortland.
Cranky Cortland. Thank you. And that was because I was unashamed in expressing my thoughts and feelings to Shauna. And we need that, right? We need to be able to be ourselves, to be vulnerable in
Yeah.
that moment. I do believe that's helpful.
And I think it's, it's about that core group.
Yes.
Who it was, because if you think about it, Jesus didn't take all 12 disciples, right? When he
Yes.
went to do that, there was a certain group there was 3 of them that he was like, you know what? I can show you who I am. And even sometimes the friendships that we have,
Yeah.
to know who's in my inner circle that I can be vulnerable with, because you can't show it to everybody. Everybody can't handle our vulnerability. And I think
Yes.
that's important to know who we can be vulnerable and open with, who can share and encourage us.
Amen. So being vulnerable, being courageous to face your fears, praying, being honest, taking inventory of where you are. These are strategies for coping to overcome. This is Believe, ladies and gentlemen. Hang in there. We got another segment coming up on the other side of this break. Thank you for tuning in.
Hello, my name is Tania McQueen. I'm the Residential Services Manager for Prestige Community Resources.
What our new facilities are respite centers. We're opening 2 in the city right now. Hopefully we'll expand to more. But respite centers are a place where people can come and get a little additional support with their mental health. Our one on Eastern Avenue is for men, and our one on Minnesota Avenue is for women. Our facilities are for all DC residents, especially focusing in on those in Ward 7 and 8. So they're really nice, and I'm excited for consumers to actually see them. What are the services that we're going to provide? Therapy, case management, medication management, all provided by professional staff, a licensed nurse practitioner, psychiatrists, sociologists, social workers, and then our paraprofessionals, our case managers. It's just a place where you can come and get the supports that you need to work on your personal goals, as well as to get your mental health straight. Simple, single adult, 18 years of age or older, a DC resident. You need to have insurance, but if you don't have it, it's okay. Still come, we'll work on getting you insurance. Have to have a negative COVID test, a negative TB test, and be willing to work on your mental health. For more information about respite services, you can contact us at 202-796-5000 or hit us up on our website at www.prestigecommunityresources.org.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed the first half of this segment talking about the subject of cope, courage to overcome, endure, and persevere, or courage to overcome, persevere, and endure. That is the acronym for COPE. And Shauna and I spent the first half of the segment talking about courage to overcome. And one of the strategies that she mentioned that I want to revisit briefly is to reflect back, to recall times when you have struggled in the past, but you overcame it. You experienced victory. And I love that, because that is a way to remind yourself, I can do this. I can get through this. I can get to where I need to be. Recollection. So I agree, we shouldn't be looking in the rearview mirror all the time, but there are times, even in the Bible, where that is encouraged. So speaking of the subject of encouragement, when you hear David encouraged himself in the Lord, what does that say to you?
Yeah. So I think, this world will teach you about having a level of self-confidence, which I think we do have to have, right? There's a certain level of belief in ourselves that we have to have. And I think, as we were saying, when you look back and see, I believe confidence builds when you see the things that you have already done. Confidence doesn't come from superficial, someone telling you, oh, you're great, you're great, you're great, you're great, you're great. I mean, that's nice, but it doesn't really get internalized until you feel that you've done something. When you look back, I can remember, if you just think about, when you walk across the stage for getting a diploma or a degree, you're like, oh, I did that, and then a level of confidence comes. I talk to my children about, when they doubt their ability, even academically, and they do something, they go back and they see they did it. I'm like, hey, you passed that test this time, you studied, this is what you did. And then that's how the confidence comes, when you see what you've done. But then there's also a level where we have to be careful, where they say an ego is when you're edging God out, right?
I like that.
And I think we have to balance knowing that there's self-confidence and there's God confidence. And the God confidence of knowing that all things that I can do, I do through Christ, right? And knowing that he empowers us to work through and do things, but it is still ultimately him who is the one who's allowing us to do everything. So I think to your question, it's really about balancing a level of self-confidence, but still knowing that God is the one who allows us to persevere, to cope, to overcome, and to have the courage to do anything.
And I love that you shared that, because I immediately think of, in comparison to David or contrast, is Gideon. So David was like, okay, Goliath, like no one else sees this. Like, no, this is not acceptable. Whereas Gideon was like, I'm the least in my family, and my family is the least in my tribe. And I believe that's where we all are when it comes to doing something beyond our ability. Like, we do what we do because we're confident in what
Right.
we do.
Right.
But then there's situations and circumstances that God allows us to be in where we're like, I don't think I can do this, which is where Gideon was. But he continued to inquire of the Lord. And what pushed him to actually move is when God sent him into the camp to hear the person say he had a dream and believed that they were going to be given into the hands of Gideon. And that's what prompted
Pushed
him to act. But also in that story, God said, well, the numbers of your army, we actually need to decrease that, because I don't want anybody to get the glory in this victory other than me. So I agree with you that God will actually put us in situations so we can be remembered of who's really in control, who's in charge, who's the one doing the things that's helping us to succeed and achieve. So we're going to spend the second half of this segment talking about persevere and endure, of the acronym COPE, courage to overcome, persevere, and endure. When you hear persevere, what comes to your mind?
When I hear persevere, I hear resilience. I hear in spite of obstacles, in spite of even setbacks or failures, that there's a get up and a try again. And I think that some people would call it grit. That you continue to do in spite of knowing that the path is not easy. It's not always going to be easy, but that you continue to do it. You continue to do it. I mean, and when at the end of the day, after Jesus' prayer in the garden to say, I am overwhelmed, what did he have to do? He still had to persevere, because
Yeah.
it wasn't over then.
Right.
And so I think that there are so many examples, even in the Bible, of people who did persevere. That's what I hear of the going on in spite of the obstacles that may be before you.
Yeah, and I think in what you mentioned, the illustration, I am reminded of Romans 5, where it talks about trials produce perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. So then there's the need, because I might be the only one, but there was a time when I didn't like conflict. Like, I just didn't like conflict. I didn't like being in conflict. I didn't like how conflict made me feel. But I grew in faith to understand that it's a natural part of life. And there are positive things that come from it.
Right.
And the Bible illustrates perseverance, character, and hope. The purpose of trials is to produce those qualities in us. And so shift in mindset, right? The need to see differently what it is that I'm facing and dealing with, so I can benefit from the ability to persevere, the character, and the hope that comes from that.
Right. Absolutely. But nobody really likes conflict. I mean,
Right.
some of us realize it's a part of life, but I don't know if anybody who really is like, yay, I love conflict. I don't know. But you're right. Knowing the growth points that come when you deal with something and it has to get messy and work through it, what then is refined on the other side of that. is beautiful. And, you know, I even think about sometimes the conflict is within ourselves. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like I'm wrestling.
Oh, yeah.
I'm wrestling. It may be wrestling with God. It may be wrestling with myself. Just like, okay, I want to do this, don't want to do this, can do this, can't do this. And even I think sometimes that conflict can produce something positive as well. And that faith, that hope that comes from that. It doesn't have to be with somebody else.
You know, I love that because not last week, but the second Sunday, I spoke on reach, stretch, wrestle, toil.
Ah, okay.
And the wrestle part was about Jacob wrestling with the angel.
Yes.
And that's my theme for 2022, 2023. Like, one of the things we need to do is wrestle with God in prayer. And so it makes me think about telling God, like Jesus actually prayed 3 times, can we not do this?
Let's just change the plan, please.
Can we
you
can we
know.
change the plan? I've had second thoughts.
Yeah.
So-
This doesn't sound fun.
Wrestling with God about how we're feeling, the fact that I thought I wanted to do this, I don't, even as it relates to the will of God, talking about how you're feeling, you know. So we talked about persevere. When you hear endure, what comes to mind?
So endurance for me sounds more cognitive. And now, when I say cognitive, it's as if there's a decision to sit with this, to be here. I'm enduring this. You know, sometimes when we hear someone saying, I've got to endure, sometimes the next word is enduring pain, right? I don't know if I've ever heard someone saying enduring joy
Right,
or
right.
enduring
Right.
happiness.
You're right.
It's usually something that's you're having to go through.
Yeah.
And so, but there's a decision to do it because whatever is on the other side of it is worth it.
Yes.
You have decided that enduring it is what the position I'm going to take. I'm going to take this stand. I'm going to stand still, let God move, and I'm going to endure it and stand still. So I think that is really a decision that we have to make once we go through the other ones, is to decide this is where I'm going to be for however long God says.
I love that because now, again, that's reinforcing like mindset, right? And there are things we literally will have to just survive. It, you know, it's usually something that we didn't desire or wish for or ask for. It's the unexpected moments of life when life happens, right?
Right.
And that whole process of accepting that this thing has happened and, you know, working through it, which doesn't happen overnight. I used to say when I was doing peer mediation outside the classroom and we were doing NFRC together, how great it would be if life truly was a sitcom where everything was resolved within 30 minutes. But it's not always like that, unfortunately. So the ability to endure, it speaks to me about a verse that's been on my mind more so since becoming an entrepreneur, and the fact that the Bible says that Jesus set out resolutely to go to Jerusalem. And this is at the time when he's going to be crucified. So he made up his mind, I'm going.
Yep.
Even though he prayed later, can we revisit this? But he endured the reality of what he was going to face, understanding how painful it was going to be. And wisdom God gave me recently simply was, and I'd love to hear your thought on this, growth comes from resistance. How can you expect to grow without experiencing resistance? So I'd love to hear your thought.
Well, you know, if you think about it, most things that do grow, there's been some type of tension. There's been something that allowed it to grow more. If it's just a matter, if you're not pushed, and, you know, I think about, you know, teacher, if you just let kids do only what they already know how to do, there is zero growth with that. But when you teach something new, when there's what we call productive struggle through the next concept, whether it's mathematics or whatever, or whatever it is, that's when the brain grows, it stretches when you learn something new, not just when you stick with what you already know.
I love that. And so, man, it's amazing how much time flies when we're doing this. But I love what you shared. And so, ladies and gentlemen, let that resistance help you to grow. Courage to Overcome, Persevere, and Endure. Thank you, Shauna, for joining us.
Thanks
This
for
is
having me.
Believe, ladies and gentlemen, where we look to inspire, influence, and impact. See you second Sunday in November.